the trickiness of federal is the reading between the lines. And if you haven't been taught to read between the lines, if you haven't been taught that certain words mean other words, right? I mean, the reality is you're often doing a lot of, you're pulling apart what may seem obvious and you're making it more complex to be a better applicant.
I'm Holly Rustic here with Grant Writing and Funding, and I'm really excited to bring on Fielding Jezreel of Jezreel Consulting. She is the owner, and she is going to be talking about federal grants today. So welcome, Fielding. It's so exciting to have you here. You're also in the mentorship, so that's exciting. And I've known you for a couple of years and all of the things, and just seeing the trajectory that you've been on and your massive amount of federal grant writing skills as well and experience. So it's been so cool to see your business grow and just the way that you're approaching everything, even in the times that we are currently in, as we're recording this in February 2025. So welcome. Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's the last several weeks have been wild, but I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. And this is my first podcast ever. So I'm very excited to be here. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited. That's so awesome. The first of many. All right, y'all. So, yeah, so exciting. So, I'm so excited for that. So, yeah, let's talk about federal grants. And I know, tell people where you're located, what got you into federal grants, and we're going to break down. Fielding really wants to talk to you all today about how to know when you're ready for federal grants, even in the times we're in, even in any administration. And we're going to talk a lot about federal grants. So this is going to be fun. So yeah, give us a little background.
Yeah, sure. So like most grant writers, I fell into grant writing with very little intention. I left graduate school thinking I wanted to write about policy, right? So I didn't really know what that meant. And I went to graduate school in St. Louis. I'm still here in St. Louis. There are not a lot of policy writing jobs. There are a lot of grassroots organizing jobs, very cool, but just not my zone of expertise or interest. And so someone mentioned that grant writing might be something I would enjoy. So I started looking for jobs in that realm and ended up in just the perfect first grant writing job for me. I had a great supervisor who really knew how to write and really encouraged me to think about the writing process. And then I brought all this stuff from graduate school, right? I was bringing program development, evaluation planning, budgeting. So I had this background in social work, which in some ways is like a liberal arts degree in nonprofits, right? And in the public sector. And so I loved all those different aspects and could bring them in grant writing. But what I found pretty quickly is that I could only copy and paste so many answers. And so I found myself getting a little bit bored, even just 9 months in. And then I got to write my first federal grant and I got to bring all those skills to the table, right? I mean, I was working with the project lead to develop a project that we thought would be competitive. I got to do budgeting. I got to do evaluation. I got to read up on all the evidence-based practices. So I got to really nerd out. And I loved it. And from there, the next job I took, I knew I'd be writing tons of federal. And it was the right job at the wrong place. And so when I left, I needed a break and I took some contracts just to get me through a few months of rest. But then I had full-time work in 3 months. And so at that point, I had to build a business, right? I have always called myself a reluctant business owner. I only own a business because I need business structure to do the work that I love to do. So I started Jezreel Consulting a few months after I took a couple of contracts and knew early on that I wanted to focus entirely on federal work. But the reality is when you start a consulting business with no plan, you don't do what you want to do. You do what people will let you do and pay you to do. So I spent a couple of years doing that, doing sort of the, managing a general portfolio of grants for a couple of organizations, doing some one-off work. And then by year 2 or 3, I was really almost entirely focused on federal and have loved it ever since. And I've been in business for 9 years at this point. So I've done federal for about 6 years, almost 6 years.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. And just like bringing in, like, like so many grant writers, it's not like you start with that vision, right? You fall into it. We always call falling into it. But I like how your experience is very, like you said, like that social work, policy, all of that with writing. So it's very geared. I would be like, oh yeah, you'd be a perfect federal grant writer, right? Looking at it from the outside, I was like, yep, that makes sense of how you got into it. And then how you were able to restructure your business to focus on that. And I love it because you called yourself a reluctant business owner. And I know the mentorship was like, no. I was like pushing you a little bit more. And it's like, okay, you got this. And I love how you decided to do and to take on what you love. So can we talk about that for a minute? Like, what was that like in your business? To go from I have to take anything that's coming to me, like to pay the bills, basically, right? To then going, no, I'm able to just lean into what I like. Like, was that a intentional decision at some point just to start saying no? Or was it just you had more coming in this way, so you're able to make that decision?
It was a little bit of both, right?
Okay.
So when I found that I could tell people that I was a federal grant writer. So at some point I decided I'm going to just market myself as a federal grant writer. So one thing I should also tell all of you listening or watching is that I only work with St. Louis organizations. So I have a very tiny market in some ways, and that has always been very intentional. And so I never imagined writing for organizations in name any other state or territory. And so, in some ways it was hard to build, but I had such a great network that as soon as I started saying I'm a federal grant writer, people started sending people who wanted federal grants my way, right? And so, for the first 2 years, I didn't know how to market myself. I didn't know how to make it clear. And literally it was just saying, I write federal grants. And if you know someone who wants a federal grant written, like send them my way, right? And so in some way it was this switch in my brain, but it was also the way I was communicating with people. And even for the first, I would say 3 or 4 years where I had really made the switch and really didn't do any local corporate foundation grant writing anymore, people would still send me clients all the time. And I would just tell the client, I'm sorry, I'm not a fit. Here's somebody else who might be. But then I would go back to the referral and be like, wow, thank you so much for sending them to me. Just so you know, I don't do that work. Here's a list of people who do. Right. I write federal grants. So it was just sort of like this repetitive process of re-educating my network about what it is that I did and what I wanted to be doing. And so to your point, it wasn't overnight, right? I took on this one-off federal grant here, this one-off federal grant over there. But to be able to do that, I started having to say no to the other work, right? Because if you've got a 6-week deadline, a 6-week timeline to turn around a federal grant, you got to be all in. So there wasn't a lot of time for me to be doing sort of that, managing an annual calendar of opportunities for organizations anymore. So a little bit of both. And the transition wasn't all at once. But over the course of about a year, I was able to transition away from that local foundation corporate writing and into federal.
Right. And I love that so much because there's so much sometimes that, especially when you're starting your business and being like, oh, like I love your referral process too. Like, I just want to lean into that for a second, because I think that's so important that a lot of people, when they start off at freelance grant writing and they're like, I can't say no because that's saying no to money and da, 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 da. And there's all this kind of, it's valid. Like, it's a new thing. It's a new, I get it. But at the same time, there's so much work out there, and there's so much, people are constantly hiring each other and sending each other, like you said. And once you do that and kind of open up that thought process of, you know what, I'm not going to take this on, but I can still serve this organization by referring them to somebody else who specializes in this type of work more than I do, right? And like, to your point, then they'll also refer work back to you. A lot of times they'll be like, oh, so it is just opening up these collaborations. And that, I think, is so important for grant writers. And I also love how you just changed your language. You literally just added federal in front of grant writer.
So obvious in some ways, but it worked. Surprise.
Yeah. And it's so funny because, and once you get clear, then people, then you're getting the right kind of clients coming to you, and almost like compounds even more, right? When you're more clear. So don't be afraid to niche, y'all. you can niche in certain things, and even in your location. So I love how you've positioned your business too as federal grants. So you would say that's a niche just in grants itself, but also in St. Louis, right? So it's like another niche, and you still have plenty of clients. I know you've even had to start wait lists before, right? So it's like also looking at in that way too, like it's okay there's enough work out there. And really, how many clients does one really need, right, to make a good living? So yeah.
Totally. Well, and I would say I've niched down even further than federal in St. Louis, and that is to, I try my very best to make sure that I'm able to say yes, right? Because part of this is making space to be able to say yes. And I'm thinking through my clients really quickly right now. 100% of my current annual contract clients are led by people who have lived experience of the service that they are trying to deliver. So that's really important to me. I have one of my two like core values is equity. And to me, like returning power to people who have an experience and then they're the ones who are leading the work, like that feels so much more powerful and values aligned for me. So as we've been navigating the last couple of weeks, many things have looked very dark and very hard. And my clients are full of the words that are on the blacklist, right, for right. Federal agencies right now. And so, but one of the bright spots has been realizing how values aligned my clients right now, like my group of clients are right now. And it's been such a bright spot. And I feel like in some ways they're like dragging me through this as much as I'm, helping them through it. So, it's been really lovely to get to work with organizations I really want to be working with.
Yeah, it is, like you said, when you have people who have lived experience who are on the board or who are the CEO or who are leading the programs, like it does make such a difference, because I've seen and worked with a ton of nonprofits who don't do that. Not necessarily that's a bad thing either, but it is a different conversation. It is a struggle sometimes for everyone to be on the same page, and all of that, because, it's, I don't know. So just side note, when I went to Indonesia back in 2004 and after the tsunami, and a lot of people were trying to impose programs, one of the nonprofits that actually hired me, into a community without getting any community input on what that program, just because they thought this is what you need, right? Westerners coming into another, this is what you need. And it might not be that drastic, or it might be in the States as well, right? And what we found was that's not what they needed. And until the nonprofit would listen to the community and find out what they need, we weren't able to run that program efficiently at all, right? So there's also just efficiencies because of that lived experience is so important to have input, right? And to have ownership and leadership of that as well. So yeah, I applaud the work that you're doing and that you've gotten that niched as well to align your values with your clients. And I think that's really special. That's really special, Fielding. Yeah.
It feels really good, right? Even in this moment that we are in, that has definitely been a bright spot and a lifting of my boat for sure.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about that too. I mean, I know the time that we're in and how you're navigating that. You can definitely lend to any of that, but also just in general, like federal grants, they may look bleak today, but you and I have been talking, and we've been talking, all the people have been talking, they're not going away. They're, for me and from my point, and I don't know if you resonate with this too, but they're just so embedded into the economy that it's like, just... No, they're not going away. It's a part of our GDP. Like, it's bigger than just giving out some charitable, like little like fluff here and there. It is a part of the economy, a big part. So can you kind of talk about your thoughts on this as well, and just, how people should be positioning themselves during this time towards federal grants?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The reality is, at the end of the day, we'll get political here for the moment. Republicans may say that they want to defund X, Y, and Z. They may say they don't want to fund this thing over here or this thing over there. And the reality is, often in the past, I can't say the future, but often in the past, they have fought for programs. behind behind closed doors, right? Because they see the work being done in their own communities, and they want that money to stay, right? There's some
Yeah.
really important things happening in all communities that use federal funding. And so it's more important than ever, right, to make sure that your legislators know about the work you're doing with federal money and why it's so important, and that advocacy that nonprofits can be doing, but really the entire community should be doing, right? Because these are programs in our public school system. These are programs that provide our public health safety net, right? Like there is no community that federal money does not touch.
Yeah.
And in the best scenarios is making that community more livable. And
Right.
so we've all got to be a part of making sure that our elected officials are speaking for us, and getting things funded that need to be funded.
Right.
So keep making those calls, if you're making calls, and if you're not, start making the calls.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, so um, we are really lucky here in Missouri, for a large portion of Missouri, to have the support of a foundation that actually matches organizations that would not typically be able to pay a consultant to write federal grants, to write that federal grant for them. And so that's part of their philanthropic efforts in our community. And I've worked with them for a number of years, and often have found myself working with organizations going after their very first federal grant. And what I've learned is that I actually love working with those clients. They're eager to learn. They know nothing typically. And so I find myself in this dual role of writing and trying to get something done in 6 to 8 weeks, but also getting to really educate them about what it's going to look like if they get the money. Because if I've done my job, they're getting that money, right? And that can be a really overwhelming thing for an organization that's never had federal funding before. So I really love pairing the education with actually doing the work. And so one of the things that I've been telling organizations who maybe don't have federal money yet, but we're thinking about going after federal funding in 2025 for the first time. And right, I mean, we feel tired. Their eyes are just very wide and they have no idea what to make of all this, right? So, kind of what I'm telling them right now is this is the time to double down on understanding what you do and do not know, right? If you identify that you don't know how to do something, if you don't feel super solid about the financial requirements of managing a federal grant, if you aren't quite sure how reporting works, right? These are things that you can start learning now. Don't submit your first federal grant in March of 2025, right? I mean, don't throw yourself into that chaos. It's kind of heart-wrenching, honestly, to work so hard on a proposal, right? Maybe 100 hours of staff time goes into a federal proposal, maybe more, only to find out that it doesn't get reviewed because the whole thing gets canceled, right? Or what have you. So maybe don't submit your first one in the next 6 weeks. That being said, I think 2025 is a great time to pay attention to what's going on. We're going to start seeing trends, right? We're going to start seeing, we're all kind of aware that the federal grants that were being competed, many of them have been pulled back. They've disappeared offline. We don't know where they went, right? One day they're there, the next day they're not. It's very disorienting. But I think what we're going to start to see in the next 6 weeks is the trickling out of those opportunities rewritten, right? Reworked. They're going to come out with a slightly different flavor. Maybe they're canceled altogether, but I think many of them will return in the coming weeks. And so it's an opportunity, I think, primarily to sit back and watch trends come to be. Find out what 2026, 2027, 2028 may look like. Again, we'll have some reshuffling of the deck in 2 years, but I think in general, what we see come out in the next couple of weeks to months is what we're going to be dealing with for a couple of years. And so learning, identifying what you don't know, sometimes that's hard to do. And then kind of focusing on those trends.
Yeah. And that's such good advice, because like you said, every day it's like the agencies switching things up and new things are coming out. And it would be so hard if you were totally new to federal grants right now to even figure it out. You would just waste so much time, right? So yeah, so it's like doubling down maybe in your foundation grants right now, or in your community and your stakeholders, bringing your board together and figuring out, okay, we were going to go this way, but if this is on the back burner for a little bit, what can we then move forward in that has worked for our organization, right? So,
Well,
and that is that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and to your point, I mean, if you're an organization that has federal funding and you're having trouble accessing it, right? I mean, we get into legal issues that I'm ill-equipped to really advise on or even talk about competently. And so, but going to your local philanthropic funders and being very direct about the need, right?
Yeah.
You may be spending money that you aren't sure you're going to be able to pull down.
Yeah.
And letting them know that and giving them options of how they can be helpful immediately to you, I think is one effort that I've seen locally here work well. So I'm starting to hear about organizations going to their, to private foundations and saying, we need a bridge loan. We need $100,000 to make sure that we can pay our staff, right? Because on the other end, you have organizations that are furloughing staff.
Yeah.
Because they absolutely cannot make up that difference and
Right.
don't believe they'll be receiving their federal funding. So, again, there's a lot of legal things happening in the background. Jump into that fight and find the people who can help you navigate those waters. But we need to be really clear and direct with private philanthropy right now to say, you value us, right? You've given us funding in the past. This is dire.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we're seeing that roll out here on Guam, right? The university is already saying, 12 million, like that's not being drawn down, like all the things like currently, like that's a lot, right? So it's looking at, and that's just starting. So it is like, how do we navigate through this? How do we advocate? How do we reach out to maybe funding sources that you haven't tapped into before, but to say, hey, this is a part of the community. If this means laying off jobs, that's going to impact everything in the community, right? So that's a huge, huge thing. Like we said, it's embedded in the economy completely, which is why I do think if we're feeling some of these impacts, more people will advocate. So get out there, right? To bring back some of this funding, to rewrite some of this funding, but to make sure that it's still embedded. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I kind of look at it going, the reason nonprofits exist is because the government cannot handle the capacity to do all those programs, and neither can private sector. And that's where the nonprofit sector has come in to be agile, to do boots on the ground, to get funding in different ways, and to pull, so it actually is more efficient for the federal government, because if they had to support all of those programs, that's a lot of money, right? So there's more of diversity in how nonprofits can lead that. So, and just to be able to have the capacity to do that. So it is to say, okay, they are needed. I don't believe nonprofits will go away completely, but just with COVID too, there was some dissolution of certain nonprofits, right? Is going to be kind of a shakeout and a shakedown and, of this, but to say, kind of pulling it back then to federal grants, should you not continue, maybe it's your first one, like you said, maybe kind of like, learn a little bit more, take this time, right? But in all essence, I mean, if you've been receiving federal grants for a long time, this could also be a point of, right, reaching out to your current federal project officer, making sure, keep moving forward. Like, how do you feel like with the existing organizations that have been receiving federal funding?
So it's very contextual. So for the clients I work with, the ones that we have pulled back from are those that have completely disappeared. My assumption, and it is an assumption, but my assumption is that something that has completely disappeared. It's not on grants.gov. It's not on the agency's website anymore. You're getting the 404 error on the website, whatever. Yeah. Those are opportunities that I believe are going to either never come back. And by never, I mean this year. They're not going to come back this year. Or they are opportunities that are being rewritten and will be reissued, meaning they're going to come back out and the due date will be 8 weeks from the time it is reissued, as opposed to something that might still be out there, still posted, still has a deadline of March 11th or whatever. If you plan to work on that, you got to be working on it, right? Because that deadline is looming at this point. And so the other thing I love about my current group of clients is that they're all incredibly entrepreneurial, and that means they are willing to pivot. That means they are willing to be aggressive about the ideas that they feel strongly about. And so, and not all nonprofits work that way, right? And so it is fun to have clients say, let's just do it. As long as it's there, let's do this, right? And we're not living in a fake world, an imaginary world where we don't understand the risks involved in submitting that, right? We're talking about, if this gets pulled at some point, do we stop working? What do we do with the materials if this isn't funded, whether the opportunity is not funded or whether our specific opportunity or application just gets declined, right? So we're having conversations. How do we reuse this? Who would we pitch this to? What private philanthropic entity would want to see something like this, right? So we're thinking through how do we repurpose and repackage. But I think for many of my clients, the relationship building that happens in a 6 or 8 week window because there is a looming deadline is really cool, right? It's this super compressed time period for people to really state, what is it we want to do? What is it we want to do together? And what do we need in terms of resources to make that happen? Right. So, we're all sort of aware that like the March deadlines may or may not be real. We're all aware that the opportunity may disappear tomorrow. But we're using the opportunity, the funding opportunity, as a way to really like pull together cool partnerships, and certainly plan for and strategize how we would reuse that and pitch that to someone else.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that look on it, that lens, right? And also to be like, what else can we use this for? And the thing is the need is still the need, whether or not that gets pulled or not, there's still the need for that program. And that's what you're identifying now. And how much is this needed? How would it be addressed the best way? All of the things. So if the funding isn't from one source, you can get it from another source. Like, it doesn't take the need away. Right. So yeah, I love that look on it for especially people who have already been experienced in federal grants and being like, okay, let's keep moving. And even, going into this, like, I know you have a grant training as well, which is fantastic, federal grant training. And you released that last year and you're releasing that again in 2025. So that's really exciting. And that can also be an opportunity, I feel like, even if folks are taking a pause right now, but they still want to search for federal grants in the future, or if they're moving forward right now, learning about federal grants is so important, especially from somebody who is paying attention to changes that are coming out, to how to pivot during this time and all of that. So can you talk about your federal grant training a bit as well?
Yeah, so I launched a federal grant training, 18 hours in person here in St. Louis in 2024. Had a lot of fun leaning into that training, just more the training side of my business. I've done some federal budget training for a consulting group. So they just wanted their entire team to have a little bit more knowledge about how federal budgets are constructed. So I've done a little bit of different trainings here and there for federal grants. And I have this grand idea about a platform where you just find all things federal grants knowledge related, right? Templates and tools and training and coaching and reviews and whatever, right? So it's this big thing. And I think the piece that feels manageable for 2025 is rolling out an online federal grants training that would mirror a lot of the training that I did in 2024. So I'm hoping to roll that out mid-year, and certainly if you're listening and you're interested in that, I'll be releasing that likely through LinkedIn and on my website, but possibly through the newsletter as well. So
I love that. So, and yeah, you have a newsletter. So and I think that's so important because there's not a lot of dedicated federal grant training. There's a lot of like general grant writing and grant training, but as far as like leaning into federal and people who have been doing it like yourself for a long time and understand the complexities and are staying on top of all of the things going on, it is a different language to a large part, right? It's more finesse language of digging into a different type of funder, right? So I think I know because I write a lot of federal grants, I've written a lot too. And it's a very different way of even how you approach the writing. As you mentioned, a lot of times you're working not in a silo, but you are working with partners and MOUs and those types of things. And that can be a little bit more nuanced, and it can also be a lot more supportive. So there's different things to look at. So I love that you've developed this training, and I know how popular it was last year and you were able to do it in person, which was fantastic. And I love that, but now that you're going to put it online as a more accessible training for other folks too. So
yeah, and one of the, I feel like I'm a federal grants evangelist. I'm constantly telling writers, like, if you think you might be interested in writing federal grants, you can do this. You have skill sets that are easily transferable, right? For federal, where the trickiness of federal is the reading between the lines. And if you haven't been taught to read between the lines, if you haven't been taught that certain words mean other words, right? I mean, the reality is you're often doing a lot of, you're pulling apart what may seem obvious, and you're making it more complex to be a better applicant. Mm-hmm. That sounds maybe more cagey than I mean it to. But really, it comes back to a lot of the skills that you learn as a grant writer, right? So, Grants 101, look at the funder's language, right? And reuse that language in your own application, as long as it, doesn't conflict with how you talk about clients or something, right? But for the most part, pulling in the funder's language into your responses is a great way for them to just very easily be like, oh, I get what they're doing. Check, check, check. I want to fund this, right? So, those types of, that knowledge base translates really well to federal. But there are things that are tricky, and it's tricky in different ways across different departments. So there is something to be learned, but it shouldn't feel overwhelming or scary.
Yeah, I love federal grants. I feel like foundation grants sometimes are much more vague. They're much more, it's kind of hard, like 2 pages, tell us what you do. And it's, where a federal grant really gives you opportunity to like contextualize, like you said, and to provide a lot more support and angles and research and statistics and just information that will answer their questions a little bit more, with different layers, and to really showcase the entire issue and the entire program. So I do feel like, and they just, they lay it out. Sometimes not all federal agencies lay it out very well, but some of them do.
But many of them do.
Yeah, many of them do. And, also the review process, I also appreciate that, because you're getting, like, people have to, it's not just like, did you use the word? It's like, how did you use the example to showcase what that is? So I know a lot of people might be listening to you going, ooh, so if you just put in the words, you could just put in GPT and it would like answer the thing for you. No, you can catch that so easily as a grant reviewer. Like, honestly, you have to put in the examples on how it's impacting your organization specifically, right?
And ChatGPT might just give you bad information.
Yeah, that too, especially with research. Yeah, don't use it for research.
We're not there yet.
Yeah, nope. So, it's really exciting. So I'm really glad that you're providing this training, and you have a newsletter, and we'll have all of the links inside on the show notes as well. But before we close out today, I also wanted to talk about the mentorship. You've been in the mentorship. This is your 2nd year. And this is the mentorship helps people in their grant writing businesses to really scale their business, to double their revenue. How has that impacted your business being a part of it?
So I did double my revenue in the first year of the program, which I was completely shocked by, to be honest. Even in my introductory conversation with you, Holly, was just like, is this really possible? Could I really do this? knowing that I did not want to grow a big team, that has never been a goal of mine.
Yeah, you're like, I don't want an agency. I'm like,
I don't want an agency.
Right. Like, how does this work?
Big line there. Don't want an agency. Can I still double my revenue? You're like, yeah, come on in. So by July of 2024, it was pretty obvious to me that I was on track to double my revenue, which was very exciting. But I think the biggest thing for me, other than sort of right sizing the way that I work with clients and just getting a little more standardized in that process, the other piece was just accountability, right? If I say out loud to this group of humans, my peers, that I'm going to do this thing, even if it's hard, I'm going to persevere. I'm going to get through and I'm going to do the thing. And so there's so much power in just saying something out loud that you're going to do it, and having all these people occasionally being like, so Fielding, how's that training coming along? Tell us where you are in that process, right? It's like, oh crap, there's a meeting coming. I got to make sure I've done my things. And so, there's just so much power in the group and the accountability that we have for one another.
I love that so much. And even, you've had babies, you had young ones at
home.
You
might hear one yelling in the background, actually. They just got home. I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay. Like we said, we always welcome babies and animals on the call. So you might see my cat at some point. But yeah, and that's been really powerful too, to be able to grow your business while you're, have little ones. Like literally, the other day, I was like, oh my gosh, your baby is like big now. You were turned off your camera to breastfeed before. I feel like it was like just a minute ago. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah. That's a whole nother podcast, right? Trying to parent while growing a business and just running a business. It's exhausting. And there's a lot of comfort in seeing other people do it alongside you, right? Because there's many of us in the mentorship, right, that have kids and are figuring out how to make it work. But it's also one of the benefits of owning your business, right? Is being able to lean into rest and joy with your kids and going to the park on a beautiful day instead of having to go to work just because, right? Because you're in control of that schedule. And again, an entirely different podcast, but yes. Yes, well, the kids and businesses.
Yeah. And I'm so excited that we'll have to have you on just for that. I would love to have a panel on just moms in business, because it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing, right? Yes. How to do that. But yeah, definitely. I love, seeing your journey in there. And yeah, I love that accountability of being, I remember that too. You're like, okay, so I'm going to do a training. And now that I said it here, I have to actually do it. And I love that you did it. And look at how amazing it's been for your business to add that, because especially like you said, you're not an agency. You don't want 50 clients right now. Like that's not your trajectory, right? Like that's not what you align with. Like what you align with is having your core group of clients. But what that does then, it limits other people to get fielding. So the training then opens the doors to have that training, and not just the services provided, but to do training for nonprofits so they can also, or organizations, so they can also get some of your amazing brain on how to write federal grants. So I'm so excited for you to keep growing that training. And yeah, I just encourage everyone to sign up to your newsletter. What is the name of your newsletter? Or do you have a name?
I don't have a name. I need a name. We'll crowdsource a name.
We'll come up with that in the coaching. We'll be like, let's have a name here. So definitely join. Where can people find you, Fielding?
Jezreelconsulting.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty vocal. Not all of it is polished. Sometimes it's just thoughts.
Okay. That's social.
But I enjoy the dialogue that does happen on LinkedIn. So, feel free to.
I love your posts. Yeah, I'm definitely, you'll even see me reposting your posts on my LinkedIn. So yeah, definitely. You get a lot of information, which is great. That's a crowdsourcing of all the things that are going on right now too, right? So, well, thank you so much, Fielding, for coming on. We'll definitely have all of the links in your show notes, y'all. Join her newsletter. She's got a lot going on, as you can see, with training and just different things coming out that you can stay up to date on federal grants. All right, Fielding, we'll see you inside the mentorship. Thank you so much again.